Hey guys, it's Kevin in here for the final, and I mean it, the final 2021 movie review until my catch-up review, that is, because I will be doing a giant catch-up review just because there's a bunch of movies I have not watched until now, and I wasn't able to put them on my what I watch list, but this will be the final one, and that is for a film that I've been excited for a very long time, and that of course is Drive My Car. And this film, we do focus on the character of Yusuke, and Yusuke is this former actor. Now he's much more of this theater director of sorts. He used to be this very acclaimed actor and things, and he's become much more of a director now. And one day, he does end up tragically losing his wife, and we cut to 2 years later where he now wants to take on this production, but he's told in doing so that he has to hire a chauffeur to kind of cart him around. His chauffeur turns out to be this 20-year-old girl, and what at first seems like these two just don't really get along, really do start to relate each other and form a bond that will help him deal with his recent loss, and changes both of their lives in a very positive way. So Drive My Car, I was beyond excited for this film. And look, I know obviously it's a very tragic film, so for me to say, excited, I don't really want to say that, but I was definitely very, very interested in this one. This is a film that I feel like has been picking up a lot of momentum lately, mainly because people are now able to see it. I was not able to see this film until this month. I had I had some opportunities to watch it, but nothing to where I could go to a theater and see it. And for a while I was just gonna watch it on HBO Max when it came out, but I told myself, this is a Best Picture nomination. This has potential to get onto my best list. Why should I waste that opportunity on, a streaming service? Why shouldn't I try to see this in a theater? So that's exactly what I did. The first chance I got, I saw this in a theater, and my God, I was absolutely blown away. Drive My Car is such a deeply personal and raw look at grief, but also at human emotions in a way that I really haven't seen before. This film really stunned me in a very profound way that is very hard to really describe, but we are just getting into right now. And what I can say is that this is one of the most beautifully done films that you will likely see in a long time surrounding grief and whatnot. But we are just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. And look, for a film like this that deals with some really heavy themes, and a lot of it is really based around just characters having conversations, you really do need a cast that is game to really sell this material, and gratefully everyone really does kill it here. I think all of the acting here is incredible in this film, but I have to say, I don't think the acting is getting enough credits. I've seen a lot of credit directed towards the directed towards writing and things like that, which I'll talk about, of course, but I want to single out the performers here, especially Hitatoshi Nishijima as Yusuke is phenomenal in this film. Now look, this is a very subtle performance. This is not a performance where this is a guy that yells a lot, or it's very showy in that way. It's very subtle and reserved, but every single emotion of his is so well realized. He really does a great job of diving deep into this character who has so many regrets, so many choices that he wishes he could have made differently, but yet tries to hold it together as much as he can. He doesn't really like to show how broken he is, but you can see how much the weight this has affected him. And I really loved what he ended up doing in this film, especially when he starts to, face the music and have those harder conversations. He really does kill it in this movie. Every single emotion just feels so genuine, and it's one of those performances that honestly did not feel like acting throughout a majority of it. This very much felt like this was a real guy that has just been very heavily affected by the death of his wife, and I really loved everything he ended up doing in this film. He just really rose to the occasion here, and for me gave easily one of the best performances of last year. But I have to say, the acting from Tōko Miura, I think, is maybe just as strong here as Masaki. Have not seen any credit directed her way, and it really does suck because I think she gives such a fantastic performance in this movie. Masaki at first is very kind of closed off, and she doesn't really want to, get to know this guy that much. They kind of are just like, going through the motions. But the more that she, starts to interact with, the more that she starts to interact with Yusuke, the more Masaki really starts to open up as a character. And these are really the moments where I think Miura really does shine through. I really loved what she ended up doing in this movie. She's a character that you're really rooting for, someone that you really find yourself gravitating towards in this film. And I think she kind of turns out to be that like trusted companion that you really do need in this situation. I really did love what she ended up doing here. I think she gave such a heartbreaking performance in this movie. If I'm being honest, I think the moments with her maybe had me crying the most. I cried quite a bit during this movie, but her moments in particular, my God, I was a mess when it came to some of her stuff in this movie. I think she just did such an incredible job. Again, it just feels like such an emotionally raw performance in that way. I loved how authentic it was. And again, I loved how kind of closed off she was in the beginning. So when she does start to open up more, it just feels that much more fulfilling. And I think she just really killed it in this movie. I really love what she ended up doing here. And the chemistry between these two is some of the most natural that I have seen of the entire year. I think their bond is one that people are really just going to find themselves latching onto. We've all kind of been in this situation where like we're going through a really hard time in our life and we just kind of stumble across the person that kind of like understands our situation the most, and that's what it really is when it comes to these two. And I think that these two they work so well off of each other, and I really just, some of the best moments in this movie I think are just the interactions between these two, and it really is because of these two performances overall. Okay, but now we need to get to the directing and the writing when it comes to this film, which, my God, that is easily one of the best parts of this entire movie. Ryusuke Hamaguchi's directing, the way that he ends up going about this movie is just astounding to me. What I really love about the directing in this film is that he takes a lot of chances here. He doesn't just tell this really somber story that just is really, miserable to watch. He does try to inject moments of levity, but he also really tries to focus less on the grief itself and more on the after. This film is really about how do you move on from such a tragic loss within your life? This is something that matters a lot to Yusuke, and I really love the way Hamaguchi directs his film. It's very patient. He does not try to overplay anything. He is very subtle with what he decides to do, but I think the film is that much better because of it. I really respect him for taking the risks that he does with this movie, because I think nearly all of them really do pay off. And my God, when those moments do come in, it is such an emotional wallop, and it really is due to just how meticulously he ended up directing this film. I think he did a really great job at thinking about what can I do to separate this film from others of its kind, because we've seen tons of films about grief, and I think the way that Hamaguchi conceived of it was definitely the right approach, because I think it very much does stand out in that way. But getting down to his screenplay, that's really what blew me away when it came down to this film. This is easily one of the best screenplays of last year for sure. Down to just the ideas that are in this film. Like I said, the grieving is a big part of it, but it's not presented in the way that you expect it to. The whole movie is not just constant monologue about the impact of, this particular person and how much, our main characters like suffering without them. That's not really what this movie wants to focus on. It wants to focus on how has he been able to move on from this, and how has this really affected his life in a very impactful way. And they do a really excellent job at doing so. Like I said, Yusuke is someone who cares a lot about his art. This matters so much to him. Him becoming this, he's been a theater actor for a very long time, but he isn't quite as relevant as he once was. And, seeing him kind of step back and, you know, do this take on this show that he's done before and trying to, you know, be, but now he's going to take more of a back seat. He's going to be like the director of it, and he's going to, you know, recruit actors and things like that. That whole section of the movie to me is just as compelling as anything involving the loss that he has in the film, because you see how much this matters to the character. I found myself just so invested in Yusuke that just exploring his day-to-day life, mundane things like that, really did excite me, really did interest me, because again, you want to see this character get that passion back. You want to see this character and how he kind of channels what he's going through his art. He very much is doing that a lot of the time throughout this movie, and I really liked what they end up doing with him. But I also love how deeply reflective this character really is, because there are a lot of regrets that this character has about his marriage in particular. And this is something that is beautifully done in the first 40 minutes of this movie, which a lot of people have talked about. The first 40 minutes of this film essentially operates as a prologue of sorts, and some people have said it's completely unnecessary. I could not disagree more. Respectfully, I get why people do feel that way, but generally, I cannot understand why someone would think that way, because in my opinion, I think the 40 minutes is probably the most crucial part of the entire film. There are a lot of things hinted at early on that really do come back in a big way, and again, a lot of that is surrounding the grief, the regrets that this character has. He didn't have the greatest marriage. There were problems within that marriage. There were a lot of cracks that were forming there, and he has a lot of regrets of how he did things. And I think that's something that's going to be deeply relatable to a lot of people. You know, when we lose someone that's very near and dear to our hearts, one of the first things that we do is think about the worst times that we had with that individual, and how could we have done things better? Could that potentially have played a role in their eventual death? You know, the unresolved sort of conflicts that were there. This is something that you can see has deeply affected Yusuke, but he's kept it bottled up inside because he's not really a person that reacts very often. He's very closed off. He's very aloof in that way. He wants to focus on his work. He's someone that will often go into his car and he just kind of spends the better part of his time reciting lines, and he doesn't really like to react very often, and you can see that eventually just gets to a point where he has to, and a lot of that is through meeting the character of Masaki. The bond that these two end up forming, like I said, you know, really does go beyond just bonding through grief, you know, because that's the obvious reason they end up bonding. But I think that these are two characters that kind of do need each other at the exact time that they find each other. And for Yusuke, like I said, going back to those like first 40 minutes of sorts, you know, it really just feels that much more rewarding getting to see all of those things play out, getting to see some of the cracks within his relationship, things that he could have done differently, and how he finally kind of comes to peace with it, you know, finally just faces, finally just lets out how he's feeling. It just feels so much more satisfying in that way, and I loved what they decided to do with that here. But like I said, it's the bond that these two characters form that really does anchor this entire movie, and I love how much this film really does take its time with it. When these two first meet each other, they're kind of just cordial. Like, she's the driver, he doesn't really want to be, you know, he doesn't really want much to do with her. He kind of just wants her to, you know, cart him around and, you know, do what he normally does, you know, when driving and things like that, reciting lines back and forth. But eventually it gets to a point where these two do start to open up to each other, and that's really when I think the movie is at its best. When Masaki, especially, when we start to get more into her personal life and what she's going through, which arguably is even more traumatic than what Yusuke has gone through, I just found it so compelling to watch, because you really do see how much these two are depending on each other, how much they want to try to get each other through this. There is just as much unresolved trauma, unresolved conflicts that Masaki feels that Yusuke does, and there's a lot of survivor's guilt through both of them. A lot of them questioning, you know, why didn't I do this? Why didn't this happen? You know, why did we take this specific choice in life? And I just found all of that so deeply relatable. So I think, again, what this movie has to say about grief, it's very unique. It's not just about grieving those moments that were positive and thinking about what you've lost. It's what you did wrong It's, can you find a way to ever right those wrongs when you know that someone has been taken away from you and you have no possible way to right those wrongs, but yet you want to do everything in your power to go back and fix it, even knowing that you can't. It just it's so powerful in that way, and I think the movie just does such an excellent job with that. So again, I think the subject of grief is covered tremendously within this movie, but also, like I said, the subject of moving on and things like that. But it's not just about that. You know, there are other things this movie has to say about art and things like that. There's a character we focus on that I haven't mentioned yet. His name is Tagasuki, Koji Takasugi, and he is this very famous actor of sorts, but he's gotten into a bit of a scandal. And the way they covered it in this movie, I thought was very interesting, because this could have been like this thing that really just kind of felt like it didn't fit in there. It felt a bit like superfluous, maybe kind of kind of just made the film a little too convoluted in that way, but it fit in so nicely. And it's because, similar to our main two characters, this guy is very lost. He doesn't really know how to go on, and he has a similar loss within his life. He hasn't lost someone near and dear to him, but he's sort of coming to terms with the fact that he has lost his luster. He no longer is this big star. He is starting to decline in that way, and I found that to be a very interesting sort of subject, and the way that all kind of stems back to our main character and what he's going through, and really seeing the dichotomy between those two characters, but also the similarities between them, I found to be very interesting, and I really liked what they decided to do with that. And yes, I will say, I've heard some people complain about this, there are lengthy scenes in this movie of just characters reading lines for this play, and I can see why that may bother some people, but it just made it feel that much more authentic. It made it feel like we are going about every single step of the way with Yusuke. It feels so much more intimate in that way, that it doesn't cut away, that we get to see those scenes play out. I love that this film really just kind of lingers on letting things play out, letting these characters interact naturally. If you've ever acted in theater before, I mean, this film gets it. This film understands what it's like to act in theater. This film understands the process that takes. The language barrier as well was a very interesting angle in this movie. Not all of the actors that Yusuke casts end up being Korean. So there are points in this movie where there are people speaking in English, and you can see how difficult that is for Yusuke, because obviously he is not, he himself doesn't know a lot of English, and I found that all very interesting what they decided to do with that. So again, there's so many topics that this movie covers that I think are just so well handled. And I think also, seeing these scenes play out, it's not just seeing these characters read lines. It's how do they decide to execute this line? The way a character phrases something even. We know what this means to them. There's a lot of history when it comes to these characters. Not in terms of like them knowing each other, but history in terms of like what they've been through. And like the way that, say, Koji is going to read a line is different from how, let's say, the American actor that is in this film, how Janice Chang is going to read a line. And I thought that was a very interesting element of this movie that, again, if you cut, I don't think would be quite as meaningful. There's so much that you're able to say just through characters reading lines, and I think that's something that I think that's something that was so interesting about this movie, is that Hamaguchi gets so much from these characters, even with them saying so little at points. And I thought that just added to just the overall... The dialogue in this film is also absolutely incredible. I just found myself so engaged with all of it. I think the film is so well written in that way. Certain ways characters like view life and things like that. I just found every conversation so insightful. There was never one where I felt like this is really overstaying its welcome. I just really like the way a lot of these scenes play out, and I think the screenplay is easily one of the best of last year. Again, it's all about that human idea, that human connection that really just kind of wraps around this entire film. I think that's really what this movie is focusing on. It's all of these characters who seemingly are not that similar, them kind of finding each other at the exact right time within their life and finally dealing with that baggage that they've kept locked away for years, those things that they don't really want to focus on. We really do get to see that here, and that really just latches you on to this entire film, and I think all of that is just so well done. And Hamaguchi really brings, I think, the sensitivity and the delicateness to this movie that really just needed to be there. He doesn't try to sensationalize anything, but he doesn't try to overdo it either. He just finds that really nice balance, and I think it's that much better as a whole. When it comes to cinematography of this film is absolutely gorgeous to look at, and there are some scenes that literally are just characters in a car, and we're watching them along for the drive, but it is so captivating to look at. Just the scenery and certain ways that scenes are constructed, I think, are just so beautifully done. There's a scene in the park, especially, that was just absolutely mesmerizing to me in terms of the cinematography. This is such a fantastic film in terms of shot composition. I don't think there's a single shot that is wasted here. The whole film is so just incredibly conceived, and I really love what they end up doing in terms of the cinematography in this film. And there are many nuances and themes that I could really get into when it comes to this movie, more that I haven't even talked about yet, but I really do think it's best to go in not really knowing too much aside from what I told you about its main plot, because that's kind of all I knew going into it. I didn't know a ton of what was happening, and I think the film is that much powerful as a whole. Now, I do want to say, this is not a film that's all these crazy things happen, and, it's a film you got to go into as blind as possible because there are all these crazy plot twists, but I think knowing as little as you do makes the film that much more powerful. And there was a lot of directions the film went into that I truly was not prepared for. One especially involving a scene where this character talks about a certain event that has happened in their life, and you think you know how it's going to go, but then that event comes back and we realize certain details that emerge, and it just adds this whole other layer to the story that I really loved a lot. And I think that if any of that stuff was removed, the film would just be significantly less impactful than it is, and I think that's something that they just did a really excellent job with. The score to this movie as well is really well done. It's not very pronounced, it's honestly very subtle, but it's one that I really did love quite a bit. I think it added to the somber nature of this movie, and I really liked what they end up doing with the score. I've been listening to the score quite a bit, especially the one that plays in the credits at the end. I think it's one of the best scores of last year. And the editing. Let's talk about the editing. Probably the most controversial element of this entire movie. I've heard a lot of people say this movie's way too long. This movie does not need to be 3.5 hours. And look, on paper, yeah, this is not a very eventful film in terms of length and things like that. When you go into a movie that is around 3 hours, you expect a lot to happen. And there are points in this movie where there isn't a lot happening. But for me, I think the fact that this film is as long as it is a great benefit to this movie. I think if this film wasn't as long, I don't think this movie would work quite as well. It's one of those films where you're constantly thinking about the fact that the movie is as long as it is, and for me, I found it so much more rewarding. I love the fact that this film goes for the length that it is. I love that this film doesn't try to, cut from scenes abruptly. It just kind of lets scenes play out to their fullest potential. There's a scene in a car. It goes on for 20 minutes. It's so fucking riveting because, again, we get every single moment of that conversation, and it just feels so much more naturalistic in that way. And I know some people aren't going to feel that way about this movie, but generally, when watching this film, I can't think of a moment that I would cut out. I would chop that down. I would make that, I would make that go on less. I can't really think about that when it comes to this movie because I do think everything is very important. When it comes to the 40-minute prologue, that especially is such a crucial element of this movie. If you remove that, I think there are many scenes, especially towards the third act of this film, that just aren't as effective in that way. That maybe you'll still get emotional, but it's not going to hit you quite as hard because you didn't get to see it play out in the beginning. But because you do get to see it play out, it works that much better. For the scenes, like I said, where they're just kind of acting out their lines, I think this is also very important because we're seeing the impact that this has on Yusuke, getting to see these lines played out, getting to see how this is him kind of getting clarity with everything. This is him trying to move on, him living out his dream in a sense, I think that section of the movie is very important. So I really can't think of anything in this film where I would chop that down. And so because that, I am greatly I am very grateful that this film is as long as it is. I love the fact that this movie went as long as it did, because I just think the film is that much better as a whole. Without spoiling anything, the way this movie ended as well, one, was not the way I would have expected. Like, the way this wrapped up, there was a point where I thought the movie was getting to its end, and I was okay with it ending there. But the way they actually wrapped it up, I thought was perfect. It was something I wasn't even really thinking about. It's like something that was like right under your noses. And especially having reflected upon it, I can't think of a better way for this movie to end than the final scene that we end on. I thought that it was such a perfect, it really just got the message across. It brought everything home in such an amazing way. And I think it was just the cherry on top of what is just such an emotionally powerful film. Guys, Drive My Car really blew me away in so many different aspects. Yes, it is a film that is about grief, and it can be very emotionally draining at points. But trust me when I say this is a movie worth watching when it comes to just how natural the performances are, the subtleties, the nuances within this film, what this film has to say about moving on, what this film has to say about regret, what this film has to say about art, and how people really do shape their art through different experiences that they've had within their life. You know, seeing characters and they're, you know, seeing characters' commitment to performing, you know, this art and things like that, but then contrasting that with the grief that our characters are feeling. All of that is so beautifully done. Amazing directing from Ryusuke Hamaguchi, who I think absolutely gave one of the most, who I think definitely gave us some of the most daring elements of last year. A beautiful score, immaculate cinematography, and a movie that is over 3 hours long and really doesn't overstay its welcome in any way. Really makes every second of that runtime work. Takes so many chances, like the 40-minute prologue. Drive My Car is really just such an experience. You've seen movies like it before, but I don't think you've seen a film that takes the risks and really just goes for the emotions in the way that this film really does. This is not a film that is trying to emotionally manipulate you, but it is a film that is trying to say a lot about the specific subject. It's a film that I think can be very therapeutic to a lot of people who have maybe gone through similar situations as these characters. And for me, it was just one of the best I've ever seen covering the subject of grief, covering the subjects that it does in this movie. I think it is absolutely one of the best films of the entire year. It really deserves every single accolade that it's gotten. And in my personal opinion, when it comes to the Oscars, this is the film that I really think should win Best Picture. Like, if I was the Academy, this is the film I would give Best Picture to, just because of how many risks it takes and how much it really does pay off in the end, but also just all the things it has to say, the humanistic qualities to it. There is so much that people can relate to when it comes to Drive My Car, and while I think some people may be put off by the length or some scenes here and there, for me, this is a film that really just captivated me throughout the entire time. There was never a point where I found myself drifting off. There really isn't anything I could think of that you could strip away from this movie. Everything about this film, I think, is utterly perfect and definitely one of the best of last year. Guys, to put it simply, Drive My Car is one of the most thoughtful and patient and emotional experiences that you will have seen last year. It deserves every bit of praise that it's gotten, and I'm absolutely going to give Drive My Car an A+. Oh my god, I cannot stress enough how much I absolutely love this movie, and try to see this in theaters if you can. I don't know if it's still, you know, playing and things like that, but thankfully I was able to see this the first opportunity that I got, as I said, and I think the film is that much more rewarding in theaters overall. But other than that, guys, in my review of Drive My Car, and now, finally, wrapped up 2021 movies. There's only one thing left to do, and that's do a catch-up review. I'm not quite done when it comes to the actual movies. There are a bunch of movies left that I still need to talk about, so you will be getting that catch-up review very soon. It's probably going to be the last catch-up review for quite some time, since I mainly just do the What I Watch videos now, but you are going to be getting that catch-up review, and you also will be getting my best movies list very, very soon, so definitely look forward to both of those. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, comment down below what you guys thought of this movie overall, left your thoughts in it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.